We are ready.
A number of years ago, back in 2006, our oldest son, he wasn't even 2 yet, and we didn't have the other 2 yet. And I had been invited to go on a trip to India, Nepal, and Indonesia. And so I went through the whole process of getting my passport. I already had the passport. Got the passport, but then I have to get an Indian visa, all that kind of stuff. And went through all that kind of stuff. Went through the whole thing. This is going to be all paid for by my home church, because we're going to go and look at some projects in these different places and sort of check in on them and see how they're doing, places that we as a church supported. So I went through that whole process, and the time came. It was like middle of October, I think it was, about October 23rd, 2006, and we got to be at the airport really early because I live in Toronto at that point, and we're going to fly to Vancouver, to Seoul, to Singapore, and then the next day to Delhi, and so forth, and so on, right? So all these sort of things, right? So we're up like really, really early. I think I got up at like 3:30 or something like that. My friend came and picked me up. We drove to the airport, parked the car, and then we'd take the shuttle into the airport. We parked the car, we get in the shuttle, we're riding to the airport. I got my gear, camera gear. I'm going to shoot video and photos. That's why I'm going. And as we get in this and we sort of pull out of the parking lot where we left the car, I'm sort of beginning to do a mental checklist of what I have. And I realize I don't have my passport. You ever have that feeling, that just cold flush, like, oh my God, like to your spine, every bit of you just like, oh my gosh, I just screwed up big time. Like, okay, what are we going to do here, right? So we get to the airport, and my friend has a phone. I didn't have a cell phone at that point because I left it with Renata. We just had the one. So they're in bed. They're sleeping. We're like 4 o'clock in the morning here right now. My flight, I think, is 5:15. And so my friend, he goes to the checkout, to the check-in, and he's talking with them and so forth, and I get the phone. Now, we got a few obstacles here. My parents, because she's sleeping, right? I'm not going to ask my wife to come to the airport with my passport with my less than 2-year-old son. So I'm calling my parents' house to see if one of them could go to my house to bring me the passport. My parents are screening calls. So they don't answer the phone unless they recognize the number that comes up on the phone. And the phone that I'm using happens to be from somebody they don't know. So as I'm doing this, I'm just hoping at 4:30 in the morning that somebody will just pick up the phone and answer. So I'm really hoping that somebody's going to pick it up. My brother answers the phone, my youngest brother. So I was like, all right, hey, Ben, I left my passport at our apartment. I need you to go get my passport and bring it to me. He's like, okay, no problem. He's never been to my apartment before, which is a funny way of parking and how do you get in and this kind of stuff. So I told him where it was, and like, okay. So I got off the phone, and I'm just hoping my brother can find our apartment, get in, and get the passport from my sleeping wife. He gets to the apartment. He gets the passport. He lets me know, I think, or something, that he's got the passport. And then I'm just hoping he gets to the airport on time, because my flight is coming very, very soon. So I'm really hoping he's going to get to the airport on time. On top of that, I'm just hoping that my wife isn't going to kill me when I get back. He gets to the airport on time, and we get in, we get on our flight, fly the horrible flight across Canada, which is by itself is like 4 or 5 hours, and then we had breakfast and had a great flight across the Atlantic. This is back, like we were flying Singapore from Vancouver on, and it was back when the whole personal screens was like brand new. Oh, that was awesome. I loved it. It was so exciting. Anyhow, the whole time, it's like there's one thing after the other. It's like I'm just hoping that this will happen. Oh, like this shouldn't happen. I'm just hoping that this should happen. I'm just hoping that this would happen and happen along the way. My hope, my hope, my hope. Hope is important. There's an old Jewish saying, it kind of goes like this. You can go without food for about 3 weeks. You can go without water for about 3 days. But you can't really go without hope for more than maybe a few minutes, because hope is so important to you. But the question is that I want to begin to address this morning, and we'll continue to look at it through this series, is what is hope? What is hope? So what I have for you to start with is a definition of hope, and it goes like this. To cherish a desire with anticipation, to want something to be happen or true. This is the verb portion of it, because it's a verb and a noun, as in hopes for a promotion, hoping for the best, I hope so, or to desire with expectation of obtainment or fulfillment, I hope she remembers, hopes to be invited, I hope somebody will bring me some coffee in a few moments. Next slide. Now we have the noun, a desire accompanied by expectation of or belief in fulfillment. You don't have to write this down. You're good. Also, expectation of fulfillment or success, so forth, someone or something. It goes on, right? And it's sort of like that, yeah. We know what the actual definition maybe, you read it, we think about it. We kind of know it. It's maybe one of those things. We know it intellectually, but maybe we don't actually live the reality of it. Because it seems to come down as we look through those two definitions. Thank you, Nate. Speak and ye shall receive. Or ask, whatever. So it seems to come down to two aspects of kind of hope in there, right? The first one is what I would maybe refer to as wishful hope, right? Wishful hope. You hope something that's gonna happen. You're late to work, or some mornings, I'm running behind getting here to church and sitting at a red light, you're like, come on, I wish this light would just turn green. I hope it turns green. I hope it turns green. You just really want something to happen, wishing that something would happen. The other one is sort of an expectant hope. We looked at that there. It has some sort of basis in reality. There's a reason why you hope that something might happen. Like there's something behind it. It's not just, hey, I hope, I hope I see a unicorn, whatever. It's based in reality. There's some groundedness to this. But what I think is for many people, what we think is hope in the way that we live it is actually just wishing. A lot of times the hope that we have, the way that we live it is based on wishing for something rather than actually having hope in something. There's a story, a man who was once sentenced to death. He obtained a reprieve by assuring the king that he would teach his majesty's horse to fly within a year, on the condition that if he didn't succeed, he would be put to death at the end of the year. Within a year, the man explained later, the king may die, or I may die, or the horse may die. Furthermore, in a year, who knows, maybe the horse will learn to fly. Hope. Hope for no real reason. But hope is not sort of unbased optimism, right? Optimism, to look at it in a negative light, to drive my wife a little crazy, the negative. Optimism is often a false hope. We think of this sort of as a hope in something, but really what we're doing, we're hoping for something that we know that really shouldn't be maybe true. And really, I think what's happening there is we're thinking of positive psychology, like just positive thinking positively as optimism. But these aren't really, or as hope. These really aren't the same thing. They're different. Optimism is not a bad thing. It's far better than pessimism. If you've ever been around a pessimist, oh my gosh. They're soul-sucking and draining, right? Hope is depending on something. We all put our hope in something. Whether we know it or not, whether we want to or not, every single one of us, as long as we're breathing, we put our hope in something. Let's think about this for a second. What do you put your hope in? If you were to really think about this for a second, what do you put your hope in? Some of us, we maybe put our hope in politics, hoping that something might change or a certain person gets elected and therefore this changes and this changes. Of course, it never really does it? Our career, If we just progress through our career, maybe that'll be, then we'll be okay. We just put our hopes in that. Maybe you just put yourself in yourself. It's like, I can do this. I don't need any help. I got this. I'm strong enough. I'm in control. I got this. For some of you, maybe it's your mom. You put your hope in your mom because maybe that's just your mom is really good at taking care of things for you. I don't know. Maybe that's it. Maybe you put your hope in the government, maybe your boss. Maybe you put your hope in pleasure because pleasure makes everything else feel good. It sort of makes up for a lot of other things. Or maybe you're putting hope in another relationship besides one of those. And we play this sort of if-only game. If only I had this. Man, I'd be fulfilled. Sort of like the Jerry Maguire, you complete me. We look at something and we think of it as, oh, this completes me. Like that's all I need. This is all I need. I don't need anything else. I just need this one thing and then I'm complete. And we just sort of play the if-only game. If only. But what does hope do for us? I think hope for us, what it does for us, is actually keeps us moving forward. I think you probably agree with that. It's the thing that it gets us out of bed in the morning. If you don't feel that you have hope, if you haven't put your hope in something, chances are you're lying on your back depressed, curled up in a fetal position maybe. That's just sort of what happens when you don't have hope. We want hope so bad, and we'll put our hope in almost anything, and we are willing to lose our minds over simply obtaining hope. Unethical people will sell us hope because we're so desperate to have it. You've probably been sitting sometimes and you're watching TV, maybe late at night. I don't know if you have this kind of stuff where you're from. Some places late at night, yeah, you shouldn't even have the TV on. But other places, like they'll be trying to sell you stuff late at night, right? Sort of when you're alone, maybe you're a little bit emotional, maybe you're feeling a little lonely, and you see that thing on TV and you're like, yeah. I need that. 5 minutes ago, you didn't even know it existed, but now I need that. That's what I'm missing. That's what will complete me. Or you think of get-rich-quick schemes, whatever it might be. Maybe it's a real estate course online that you're going to sign up for, and they're going to show you how to make millions of dollars by next week in real estate. Or they're going to show you how to do this. All you have to do is invest in this and this and this, and you're just going to get rich so fast because it's going to be so easy. And you deserve it. You deserve it. Everybody else is getting it. Why not? Why shouldn't you have it? Everyone else is getting rich. Selling you hope to have the life you've always wanted. That's what they're doing. But many of us still experience a loss of hope. Hopelessness. Because a lot of these things, they really don't complete us. They don't fulfill us. They don't fill that need that we have, that thing that we need to put our hope in. It doesn't really work. A few years ago, Rick Warren, he's a pastor in Southern California, he was actually going to be preaching on hope, and he did some research and got a list of, excuse me, about the the most common reasons for people to feel hopeless. And it's kind of like this. You feel alone or abandoned. Can you bring that one up? Life seems out of control. You just don't know what's going on. You have no control of things, and we have a hard time when we don't have control over things, right? A lot of us, we want to have control over every aspect of our lives, and it drives us crazy, leaving us feeling hopeless if we don't. Life seems out of control. Slow down. You don't see a purpose in life. You don't feel as though your life has meaning. Maybe you're stuck in a place, and we'll touch that in a second too. You just feel the stuff that you're doing day in and day out, it doesn't really make a difference. It doesn't really matter. And when it becomes this routine, this monotonous thing of day after day or week after week, or maybe even hour after hour, no matter what your stage of life is, if you're at that feeling, you're probably going to feel a sense of hopelessness. Grieving a loss. Many of us have probably experienced a tremendous loss from somebody in our family, a close friend, a parent, a child, a miscarriage. Grieving a loss that can just leave us totally emotionally raw and hurting, leaving us feeling as though we're hopeless. Go ahead. You don't have what you need. You're sort of stuck and can't get out of it. Maybe you're stuck in a job, or you just feel you can't get out of where you're at. You feel you're stuck in a dead end. There's nowhere to go. How do you get out of the place that you're in? Maybe you're so far in debt. Maybe you're so far behind in your studies. Your grades are horrible. Whatever it is, maybe that's where you're stuck. You just don't feel as though you have what you need, and you can't get out. Reminds me of a U2 song, by the way, for those of you who know U2. You've done something wrong. Shame, regret, remorse, guilt. Let me just say a side thing here. I think we, as the church in general, we downplay these things tremendously. We pretend that these don't exist, or that you should feel bad for experiencing them. But the problem is, these are real things that we do experience. And the church is the place that we should come to be able to actually manage and live and work through these things with others who are being real and vulnerable and open and courageous. That's just a side. Next. You've been deeply wounded by someone. I don't think there's anybody here that wouldn't say that you haven't experienced that. Been deeply wounded by somebody. It could be anybody. Anybody who has some sort of emotional attachment to you in some way. Even your boss, you may not feel you have an emotional attachment. You're affected some way, emotionally, psychologically, and so forth. You're pulled in the wrong direction. Just don't know really where to go. And you're hounded by fear. I think when you're hounded by fear, you can't even make a decision. It's like, you're just terrified. I know I felt that sometimes. Where I don't know what to do. I'm afraid if I make that decision, it's going to be wrong. If I make that decision, it's going to be wrong. And I'm just going to end up in a worse position than I'm in right now. When defeat looks certain. Hopeless. There's no way out. I'm nearly done. There's no way I can fix this. Defeat is certain. These are serious things. These are real serious things. These aren't the kind of things that we just say, all right, suck it up, buttercup. Or borrow from, friend Chris Hutchinson, ranger up, There's time for those things. But these things aren't the things that you just sort of suck it up and get over it. These are real, serious things that we want to be honest, we want to be open about and actually try to deal with. But wishful hope isn't going to help in these situations. Expectant hope might help focus you as you go through these. But I think that there's something better. I think that there's another hope that's more grounded, even than expectant hope. And there's a reason why we have to hope in a hope. And we'll talk about this morning. So what I want to do is I want to read through a passage here, and then I'm going to go back through it and sort of talk about it, a little bit different from how I usually do it, but I'll read through the whole thing. It's in the book called Hebrews. So you can look this up yourself later on, Hebrews chapter 6. We're just going to read through it, and then we'll go back through it. Now, when God made this his promise to Abraham, since he could swear by no one greater than himself, he swore by himself, saying, surely I will bless you greatly and multiply your descendants abundantly. And so by persevering, Abraham inherited the promise. For people swear by something greater than themselves, and the oath serves as a confirmation to end all dispute. In the same way, God wanted to demonstrate more clearly to the heirs of the promise that his purpose was unchangeable. And so he intervened with an oath. So that we who have found refuge in him may find strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us through two unchangeable things, since it is impossible for God to lie. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, sure and steadfast, which reaches inside behind the curtain, where Jesus, our forerunner, entered on our behalf, since he became a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. Now, there's some stuff in there you're probably already like, what does that mean? So we'll talk a bit about that. Abraham, if you haven't heard of him before, way back, early Old Testament, and he is sort of what we use. You'll see this throughout Scripture, no matter where you read, especially even as you look through the New Testament. He is the classic example of faith being used, especially when it's talking with other Jews, with other Hebrews here. The classic example of faithful patience. He hung on to God's promises even when he had no idea what he said he would do. Now, let me just tell you what the promise was, just in case, because I didn't have that in my notes. I realized, wait, they might not know what the promise was. So let me just sort of step back for a second. The promise to Abraham was that through him, God would bless the nations. God would bless all of humanity through him. God makes this promise to him, and at the time, he didn't even have any kids. It's like, okay, how's this going to happen, God? Like, I'm old. I got no kids. My wife is old. We haven't had kids. Eventually, they do have a child named Isaac. Maybe you heard of him too. But it was through him, through this line, all the way down to Jesus, because Jesus was the promise, because it was through Jesus that all nations would be blessed. This was the promise that was being made. And Abraham at the time had no idea how this promise that God made to him was going to be fulfilled. It's like, are you kidding something? Like really? Like, how's this actually going to happen? So even in that, he had no idea how God would do what he said he would do, but he trusted him to actually do. Abraham knew, and we should know, that God means what he says. His promises are unbreakable, as they could possibly be, as we see right there. Watch this. When God says, surely I will bless you, if you got that up there, Agatha, surely I will bless you, what he's actually suggesting there is more like, if I don't bless you, then I can't be trusted. If I'm not going to come through for you now, you shouldn't trust me, and nor should anybody else ever trust me again. N.T. Wright, scholar, bishop, paraphrases it, basically says this. He's like, this is what Hebrews is saying there. It says, if I don't surely bless you, very English, may my name be mud forever. It's like, may I be nothing. May my reputation be destroyed for you if I don't come through and as I make this promise to you. So God made these promises to Abraham, then he swore an oath saying that he would keep them. So he makes the promises and then swears an oath, and this is what they were talking about with two unchangeable things, because God cannot lie. Neither of these things can be broken. Neither of these things is breakable. God himself is unchanging. His promises always stand because of that. Because he's unchanging, his promises must be filled. They are firm. They are fast. We maybe heard that term. What it means is just they are solid. They are trustworthy. They're firm. Now, we come to this term about having the anchor there. It's like, all ships, they have an anchor. When they go to sea, they have an anchor. If they didn't have one, they'd be in trouble. So they have to have an anchor on it. It's just sort of the nature of the sea that you must have an anchor. But then it says, the anchor behind the curtain. It's like, what? How does the anchor behind the curtain? But what he's doing here, the author of Hebrews, is he's mixing a couple metaphors. The anchor was, first of all, behind the curtain. The curtain represents what the Jewish people, they viewed this one place in all of the world, the Holy of Holies, in the temple in Jerusalem. The place behind it, behind the curtain, was considered by them to be the holiest place on earth. There was no place holier, and once a year, the high priest would go behind the curtain and meet with God and intercede to speak to him on the people's behalf. So this is the curtain that they're referring to. So going behind the curtain. But then you got this anchor behind the curtain. The anchor. Jesus being the high priest. They have that phrase there. So what he's talking about is Jesus being the high priest, going behind the curtain to intercede on our behalf. However, then you got this anchor thing mixed in. This sounds a little funny. But what it means is that Jesus is the anchor. And as long as we're on the other end holding to that tight, we're good. We are anchored in the presence of God. That we are not promised we are not promised that there won't be storms. In fact, we see this again and again through the New Testament. We see people that are experiencing storms that are close to God. We see Jesus himself in the middle of storms with his disciples. The fact that we're talking about an anchor implies that there will, in fact, be storms. But what we are promised is that we will be kept safe in the end. He is firm and secure. This is faith in God himself, not in faith for faith's sake. We're not having faith in faith. This isn't some sort of blind leap. What God's telling us here is that he can be trusted. We have a reason to place our hope in him. And we're going to talk more about what that looks like over the next number of weeks. But we have a reason to place faith in him because we are trusting in the character of God, who he says he is and who we know him to be through knowing Jesus. Because of Jesus, we have so much more data about God in terms of the written word and even the living word as John referred to Jesus. And we have so much more than that, plus the passage of time, the experience of people who've gone before us. How much more should we be able to trust God to do what he says he's going to do than Abraham was? How much more should we be able to do that? The Christian hope, when we talk about that, the Christian hope is not a vague sense that things will probably turn out right. That's just optimism based on sort of nothing going on there. That's a positive attitude. But the positive attitude itself doesn't need to be based in reality. What we're saying here and what the author of Hebrews is saying, we have a reason, we have a basis, we have something to place our trust in. We have a hope. We have something to base it on. Hope is trusting in God through the good times and the bad to keep the promises he has made. Hope is looking ahead when God will complete the work that he began in Jesus, in our world and in us. It all comes back to Jesus. Jesus, the focal point of history. Who he said he was and what he did. Behold, he is making all things new. The Apostle Paul, he referred to it sort of this way. He says, "For I am sure of this very thing, that the one who began a good work in you will perfect it until the day of Christ Jesus." Certain hope is based on what God has said, not on what we wish. Through the storms of life, we know that the anchor is secure at Jesus' end. We need to make sure that it's firmly attached at our end and place our hope in him.